Those quotes are from Millions of Facts by Sir Richard Phillips, page 537. End of Section 8. Section 9. Cause of solar and lunar eclipses. An eclipse of the sun is caused simply by the moon passing before it, or between it and the observer on the earth. Of this, no question has been raised, but that an eclipse of the moon arises from a shadow of the earth is in every respect unsatisfactory. The earth has been proved to have no motion, either upon axis or in an orbit around the sun, and therefore it could never come between the sun and the moon. The earth is proved to be a plane always underneath the sun and moon, and therefore to speak of its intercepting the light of the sun and thus casting its own shadow upon the moon is to say that which is impossible. Besides this, cases are on record of the sun and eclipsed moon being above the horizon altogether. Quote, "The full moon has sometimes been seen above the horizon before the sun was set. A remarkable instance of this kind was observed at Paris on the 19th of July, 1750. When the moon appeared visibly eclipsed while the sun was distinctly to be seen above the horizon." End quote. Quote, "On the 20th of April, 1837, the moon appeared to rise eclipsed before the sun had set. The same phenomenon was observed on the 20th of September, 1717. End quote. Quote, "In the lunar eclipses of July 17th, 1590, November 3rd, 1648, June 16th, 1666, and May 26th, 1668, the moon rose eclipsed whilst the sun was still apparently above the horizon. These horizontal eclipses were noticed as early as the time of Pliny." End quote. The moon's entire surface, or that portion presented to the earth, has also been distinctly seen during the whole time of a total eclipse, a phenomenon utterly incompatible with the doctrine that the earth's shadow is the cause of it. Quote, "The moon has sometimes shown during a total eclipse with an almost unaccountable distinctness. On December 22nd, 1703, the moon, when totally immersed in the earth's shadow, was visible at Avignon by a ruddy light of such brilliancy that one might have imagined her body to be transparent and to the enlightened from behind. On March 19th, 1848, the above quotes were Astronomy and Astronomical Instruments, page 105, by G.O.G. Carey. Also, McCulloch's Geography, page 85, and Illustrated London Almanac for 1864. The astronomical part in which is by James Glaisher, Esquire of the Greenwich Observatory. And so, on March 19th, 1848, it is stated that so bright was the moon's surface during its total immersion that many persons could not be persuaded that it was eclipsed. Mr. Forster of Bruges states in an account of that eclipse that the light and dark places on the moon's surface could almost be well made out as an ordinary dull moonlit night. Quote, "Sometimes in a total lunar eclipse the moon will appear quite obscure in some parts of its surface, and in other parts will exhibit a high degree of illumination. To a certain extent, I witnessed some of these phenomena during the merely partial eclipse of February 7th, 1860. Returning to quote, "I prepared during the afternoon of February 6th for witnessing the eclipse without any distinct expectation of seeing much worthy of note. I knew, however, that upwards of 8/10 of the disk would be covered, and I was anxious to observe with what degree of distinctness the eclipsed portion could be viewed, partly as an interesting fact, and partly with a view of verifying or discovering the weak points of an engraving, in which I am concerned, of a lunar eclipse." Quote, "After seeing the increased darkness of the penumbra softly merging into the true shadow at the commencement of the eclipse, about 1 o'clock a.m. Greenwich time, I proceeded with pencil and paper, dimly lighted by a distant lamp, to note by name the different lunar mountains and plains, the so-called seas, over which the shadow passed. During the first hour and 10 minutes, I had seen nothing unexpected. I had repeatedly written down my observations of the remarkable clearness with which the moon's eclipsed outline could be seen, both with the naked eye and with the telescope. At 1 hour 58 minutes, however, I suddenly noted the ruddy color of a portion of the moon. I may well have give my notes in the original words as copied next day in a more connected form. 1 hour 58 minutes Greenwich time. I am suddenly struck by the fact that the whole of the western seas of the moon are showing through the shadow with singular sharpness, and that the whole region where they lie has assumed a decidedly reddish tinge, attaining its greatest brightness at a sort of temporary polar region, having Mayan about the position of its imaginary pole. I particularly notice the Lake of Sleep has disappeared in this brightness instead of standing out in darker shade. And I notice that this so-called polar region is not parallel with the rim of the shadow, but is rather west of it. 2 hours 15 minutes, some clouds through very thin and transparent now intervene. 2 hours 20 minutes, the sky is now cleared. How extraordinary is the appearance of the moon. Reddish is not the word to express it. It is red and red hot. I endeavor to think of various red objects with which to compare it, and nothing seems so like as red-hot penny. A red-hot penny with a little white-hot piece at its lower edge standing out against the dark blue background. Only it is evidently not a mere disk, but beautifully rounded by shading. Quote, such is its appearance with the naked eye. With the telescope, its surface varies more in tint than with the naked eye, and is of not quite so bright red as when thus viewed. The redness continues to be most perceptible at a distance from the shadow's southern edge, and to be greatest about the region of Endymion. The Hercynian mountains north of Grimaldus are, however, of rather a bright red, and Grimaldus shows well. Merecrisium and the western seas are wonderfully distinct. Not a trace to be seen of Aristarchus or Plato. 2 hours 27 minutes. It is now nearly the middle of the eclipse. The red color is very brilliant to the naked eye. After this, I noticed a progressive change of tint in the moon, 2 hours 50 minutes. The moon does not seem to the naked eye of so bright a red as before, and I again am reminded by its tint of red-hot copper, or rather copper which has begun to cool. The whole Grimaldi is now uncovered. Through the telescope, I noticed a decided gray shade at the lower part of the eclipsed portion, and the various small craters give it a stippled effect, like the old aquatint engravings. The upper part is reddish, but two graceful bluish curves like horns mark the form of the Hercynian mountains, and the bright region on the other limb of the moon. These are visible also to the naked eye. Quote, at 3 hours 5 minutes, the redness had almost disappeared. A very few minutes afterwards, no trace of it remained. Long clouds came on. I watched the moon, however, occasionally gaining a glimpse of its disk, still a quarter to 4 o'clock, when, for the last time on that occasion, I saw it faintly appearing through the clouds, nearly a full moon again. And then I took leave of it, feeling amply repaid for my vigil by the beautiful spectacle which I had seen. End quote. Mr. Walkey, who observed the lunar eclipse of March 19, 1848, near Columption, says, quote, the appearances were as usual till 20 minutes past 9. At that period, and for the space of the next hour, instead of an eclipse, or the shadow, or umbra, of the earth being the cause of the total obscurity of the moon, the whole phase of that body became very quickly and most beautifully, the previous quotes were from the Honourable Mrs. Ward, Trimleston House, near Dublin, in Recreative Science, page 281. The whole phase of that body became very quickly and most beautifully illuminated, and assumed in the appearance of the glowing heat of fire from the furnace, rather tinged with a deep red. The whole disk of the moon being as perfect with light as if there had been no eclipse whatever. The moon positively gave good light from its disk during the total eclipse. End quote. In the astronomical portion of the, quote, Illustrated London Almanac for 1864, end quote, by Mr. Glaisher, a beautiful tinted engraving is given representing the appearance of the moon during the total eclipse of June 1st, 1863, when all the light and dark places, the so-called mountains, seas, etc., were plainly visible. In the accompanying descriptive chapter, the following sentences occur. Quote, At the time of totality, the moon presented a soft woolly appearance, apparently more globular in form than when fully illuminated. Traces of the larger and brighter mountains were visible at the time of totality, and particularly the bright rays proceeding from the Tycho, Kepler, and Aristarchus. At first, when the obscured part was of small dimensions, it was of an iron-gray tint, but as it approached totality, the reddish light became so apparent that it was remarked that the moon seemed to be on fire, and when the totality had commenced, it certainly looked like a fire. Previous quotes from Philosophical Magazine, number 220, for August of 1848. Certainly looked like a fire smoldering in its ashes and almost going out. End quote. If then, the sun and moon have many times been seen over the horizon when the latter was eclipsed, so how can it be said that the Earth's shadow was the cause of a lunar eclipse, when the Earth was not between or in line with the sun and moon? And how can the moon's non-luminous surface be distinctly visible and illuminated during the very totality of an eclipse if all the light of the sun is intercepted by the Earth? Question mark. Again, if the moon is a sphere, which it is declared to be, how can its surface reflect the light of the sun? If her surface was a mass of polished silver, it could not reflect from more than a mere point. Let a silvered glass ball or a globe of considerable size be held before a lamp of fire or any magnitude, it will be seen that instead of the whole surface reflecting light, there will be a very small portion only illuminated. But the moon's whole surface is brilliantly illuminated, a condition or effect utterly impossible if it be spherical. The surface might be illuminated from the sun or any other source if opaque, instead of polished like an ordinary silvered mirror, but it could not shine intensively from every part of it, and brightly illuminate the objects before it, as the moon does so beautifully when full and in clear firmament. If the earth were admitted to be globular, and to move, and to be capable of throwing a shadow by intercepting the light of the sun, it would be impossible for a lunar eclipse to occur thereby, unless at the same time the moon be proved to be non-luminous and to shine only by reflection. But this is not proved. It is only assumed as an essential part of a theory. The contrary is capable of proof, and proof beyond the power of doubt, visually, that the moon is self-luminous or shines with a light peculiar to herself, and therefore independently of the sun. A reflector necessarily gives off what it receives. If a mass of red-hot metal be placed before a plane or a concave surface, heat will be reflected. If snow or ice be similarly placed, cold will be reflected. If light or ordinary colored be presented, the same will be reflected. If sound of a given pitch be produced, the same pitch will be reflected. If the note A can be sounded upon a musical instrument, a reflector would not turn the note B or C, but the same note, altered only in degree or intensity, but not in pitch. A reflector receiving a red light would not return a blue or yellow light. A reflector collecting the cold from a mass of ice would not throw off heat, nor the contrary. Nor could the moon, if a reflector, radiate or throw down upon the earth any other lights than such she receives from the sun. No difference could exist in the quality or character of the light, and it could differ in no respect but the quantity or intensity. The light of the sun and of the moon are different in their general appearance, in the color and action upon the eye. The sun's light is drying and preservative, or antiseptic. The moon's light is damp and putrefactive. The sun's rays will put out a common fire. The moon's light will increase the combustion. The light of the sun falling upon certain chemical substances produces a change of color, as in photographic and other processes. The light of the moon fails to produce the same effect. Dr. Lardner, at page 121 of his excellent work, quote, The Museum of Science, end quote, says, quote, the most striking instance of the effect of certain rays of solar light in blackening a light-colored substance is afforded by chloride or silver.